This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. This is your host, Justin Lewis, here to help give you the tips, tricks, tools, tactics, really whatever you need to improve your life by doing hard things so you can overcome average. The goal of the show is to really get you to the other side of that difficulty that's standing in between you and where you want to be. And we're here to help you get there. And today is our Monday show, so you're going to hear from me and a guest, a high-performing individual who's done some pretty incredibly hard things. On Thursdays, you can actually hear me and my co-host, Ty Crockett, listen and talk about the action items that today's guest will give us, as well as give each other challenges to push ourselves and give you an example of what doing hard things looks like, and hopefully to inspire you to take action and do hard things as well. Now, let me tell you about today's guest. Today, I was incredibly fortunate enough to talk with Jeff Rasley. Now, let me ask you, have you ever outran an avalanche? Well, Jeff has. Jeff has had multiple treks over to Nepal and the Himalayas in which he has, on one instance, literally had to outrun an avalanche with his trekking team. Today in the show, we also talk a lot about weeding the garden, an expression Jeff uses to really talk about how you need to look at your life. Look at what is bringing you the most fulfillment. What's giving you stress, and maybe you need to reinterpret that, or maybe you need to eliminate it. Jeff is a very successful lawyer. He's started many foundations. He also has apparently the key to the city of Indianapolis, which is really cool. But and he's also written many books. But one thing I really encourage you to listen for and listen to is his insights about life and what's most important. And I would challenge you, as you listen to this, to think about what's most important in your life and how to get more of that. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jeff Rasley. All right. Well, thank you for being on my show, Jeff. I'm so very excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, let's start off the show asking the question that I ask all of my guests. Jeff, what is the hardest thing you've ever done?
Well, thank you for asking. And because I've listened to your show, I knew you would ask that. So I'm prepared to answer, and I have three answers.
Awesome.
First is what has taken me a lifetime and is far from unfinished. Hardest thing is to become a fully realized human being, and by that I mean a person who is sensitive, thoughtful, wise, loving, and a responsible person. But secondly, on more of a medium term answer to the question, making it through law school and passing the bar exam, which was very difficult, but it was done in a discrete amount of time as opposed to a lifetime endeavor. And the third answer is a one incident, single experience. And I have so many of those. This one was the hard one to decide, but I thought this one is at least kind of interesting. Getting caught in an avalanche on a Himalayan peak while suffering from altitude sickness and coming out alive.
Wow. I have to say I'm really excited to dig into all three of these, but that third one gives me trepidation, and I'll explain a little bit later in the show. But I'm really curious. First of all, thank you for giving our audience three answers, each with different time frames, you could say, because I think that that's really important. You know, like you could kind of say the hardest thing all of us do is life, right? But that's in the longest time frame that we have. So I'm very curious as to why you specifically chose becoming a fully realized human being, and what are some experiences that you've had that have maybe pushed you forward in that or pulled you back?
Yeah, well, I think that those of us who feel a sense of obligation to give back to the world are always striving to do it better. To find other ways to give back, other ways to be responsible, and to contribute to our family, to our community, to our place of work, our friends, and so that's kind of the way that I see what I was trying to say in my answer to that first question. And there's people who've studied philosophy and theology, which I have, can can expound on this for way too long, for where your listeners would be yawning and you would be falling asleep.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time in the academic world studying philosophy, theology, and the humanities, as well as law school, and I went to seminary. So I've thought deeply and long about this kind of thing, and it's hard to capsulate in sort of quick, easy answers, but I think just trying to live deeply, trying to live meaningfully, and I have had sort of two quick ways of defining that beyond what I've already said. And one is to live life as an adventure, and the other is to try to create your life as if it's a work of art. And I've tried to do both of those.
Jeff, what would you say to people who might be thinking, well, I'm not an artist. Like, I don't have anything in this the whole life thing handled. Based on what I've read about you've had so many adventures, so many experiences. What would you say to people who feel like that's just kind of out of their reach?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I would gently say, I think you're wrong. Because by trying to create a life like it's a work of art, I don't think you need to be an artist at all, but I think you do need to develop an aesthetic of what is a beautiful life. And I think anybody can do that who just thinks about it. When do you feel beauty in your life? And not and I don't mean artistic beauty. I just mean when you have that sense of, oh wow, that's just right. This relationship, or this job, or this game I just played, anything, and then pay attention to when you have those moments or experience those relationships, and and learn from that. Okay, this person I really connected with. It just, we felt this beautiful connection. Then hang out with that person, develop that relationship, look for other people like that. And I mean, I think you can go down as low as what books, magazines, TV shows, even just sort of very quick experiences that you have, and I think we all do that. So it's just a matter of paying attention and trying to increase the amount of time that we spend in our lives with those things that give us that sense of beauty.
Were these two principles, I could say, always important in your life, or was there a time when maybe you weren't aware of them?
Yeah, when I was younger, I wasn't nearly as thoughtful and self-conscious about this. I would say I was probably 18 years old when I really committed myself to trying to live life as an adventure. And I decided to try to do that in a radical way, which was to drop out of college and hitchhike around the country. But I did that very intentionally, in the sense that, my life is just too easy, and I've been sort of doing the same thing, all of it, which was going to school. I need to experience different people, different places. And so I thought this is a pretty adventurous way to do it. And that's when it just sort of, sunk in. I want to live life as an adventure, not just go on an adventure once in a while. Although when you do that, that's sort of, when it's most intense. As far as taking sort of an aesthetic view about how to create a beautiful life, that came much later. Probably I started to understand that when I was in college from studying humanities and philosophy and theology, but I probably didn't really have it sink in until I got to be about 40.
Why that particular age?
Well, when I hit 40, I had what my wife described as a midlife crisis, or at least I was manifesting symptoms of it. And I was working hard. We had two little kids, and I was just really stretched. I was by then the senior member in a small law firm, had another business on the side. And I was also trying to be a very involved dad. I was coaching a bunch of youth sports. I was very active in my church. I was just like busy all the time. And it was starting to manifest in stress and anxiety. And like everything was great. It's like, I have this wonderful life, but it's just too busy. There's just too much. So my wife one day slaps a brochure about trekking the base camp trail in Nepal down in front of me on the table, and she says, "Why don't you go do this?" And she realized I needed to just break out of this very active, over busy life I had and sort of reboot. And she knew that I'd done that before in terms of doing kind of adventurous travel experiences. And I hadn't done that for a number of years because of all these obligations I had. So I did that. And in that time of just sort of focusing on taking one step and then another step and so forth to get up the highest trail in the world, it sunk into me that my life, although on the surface was great, it had become not beautiful. And so at that point, I committed or recommitted to trying to just be more conscious about what are the beautiful things in life and appreciating them, which I was living. I just, got too focused on feeling busy and stressed rather than appreciating the wonderful things in my life.
Why did you have to? Why did you have to go all the way to Nepal to have, that sort of insight? Because I hear stories somewhat similar to this, where people have to go somewhere else or be in a different situation to have kind of a mind-changing insight, and I'm curious as to why that had to happen.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that I think everybody would need to do that, but I think if you're not making progress, if you're just sort of stuck, it's sort of like rebooting your computer, when the computer is misbehaving and it's not doing what it's supposed to do, what you want it to do, although it's sort of functioning. You turn it off, you reboot it. And I mean, that's sort of the metaphor for what I needed. I just needed to get away and to break out of my regular life. And, for me, it really worked.
Well, I see kind of some parallels between 18-year-old Jeff trekking around the United States and 40-year-old Jeff trekking around Nepal. What would you say to people who think, I can't, like, how do I break out of my life? Like, what does that even look like in an everyday circumstance?
Well, I think it's actually a matter of courage, and there are certain virtues that throughout the ages, people that have thought about what is the good life have thought there are certain virtues you need to live by, values you need to live by to live the good life, and courage is one of those. And I do think lots of people feel stuck in the life they're in. And if you ask them things about, well, why don't you change it? They'll have all kinds of excuses of why they can't do it. But if you go through and take on each of those excuses one by one, you almost always will find, no, that really is just an excuse. You can change that. A lot of friends I've had over the years have said, "Oh, I'd love to go trekking in Nepal. I'd love to go, climb a Himalayan peak. That'd be so great, but I can't do it." So, well, why can't you? I said, well, I can't get away from my job." I said, well, you can't. Well, don't you take a vacation every year? Well, yeah, but my wife wouldn't let me, or my husband wouldn't let me. I said, what do you mean they wouldn't let you? What, they're going to take a gun and shoot you if you say I need to do this? Or why don't you ask them to come with you? But I mean, I've heard those, and those are usually the two excuses I hear for why I can't, do sort of this big thing. And, in my case, because I, for many years, have led trekking and climbing expeditions, that's the best example I have of people, so often say, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't. And then, well, tell me why you can't. And, yeah, you really can. It's just that you're not willing to just do it, to just be bold enough to and when I say to break those bonds, I don't mean like breaking the bond of your marriage, or getting fired. um Although, if if your spouse is so awful that he or she would say, no, you can't do that for something you really want to do, maybe you ought to consider divorce. Or if your employer, or your employees, if
Hmm.
you're the boss, say, no, you can't leave, maybe you better consider finding a different business or employment.
It's very true. I listen to another podcast called Bigger Pockets every now and then, and one of the hosts of the podcast really says, in the form of real estate investing, if you don't like your business, then you need to change your business. And you could kind of switch it to your life. If you don't like your life, then you're fully capable of changing it. You just need to get over all those excuses that you're so ready to hand yourself. And I want to ask, how are you, I guess, where did you find the courage to hitchhike around the United States at 18, or go to Nepal? Because those are pretty scary things for the average human being.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose maybe part of it is just my nature. I mean, we're partly just the genetics we were born with, and then we're partly how we were raised. And I think my parents raised me to be curious and to want to have experiences, and to see the world. My family, as I was growing up, all we did in terms of vacation is we'd go to Florida once a year, and then we took a big family driving trip from Indiana to Southern California once. And when I was 10 years old, we did that. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I mean, just seeing the West, if you grew up in the flatlands of Indiana. And so I think that experience kind of turned me on to travel. So that always intrigued me and something I wanted to do. But in terms of just, okay, I'm just going to do that. Um, Maybe I was born with more of a sense of willingness. to try something than other people. But I don't think that is just an innate quality. I think that's something that anybody can cultivate in yourself, and especially if you feel like I'm feeling stuck, then you really need to spend some time introspectively and look into your life. Why do I feel this way? What is it that I feel stuck in? And then if you can understand that, where in my life is it that I'm really feeling stuck? Then the next step should be, okay, how do I get unstuck? And I think, that again, that's something you introspectively, you may be able to figure out, but that's also a place where you might, turn to somebody else for guidance.
Wow.
Like this show.
What a wonderful plug. Those questions, honestly, especially because as we're recording this, we're a week or two away from a new year. Classically, people take the new year as an opportunity to, try and reformat their lives, you can say, which is a good thing. Maybe they should do it more often. But those questions are so simple, yet I would wager that the answers are just as simple. The difficulty comes in all those excuses that we talked about, right?
Yeah, and that Nike commercial, "Just do it." I mean, that's it's sort of annoying, especially when you see these amazing athletes. Well, okay, I can't do that, but there is a truth to that simple. I mean, I do think that there's a simple wisdom there, that ultimately it is just a question of will, of determination. If you really feel stuck and you're not happy in your situation, well, it's not going to change if you don't just do it and change it.
Yeah. I would also say that it helps to have someone around you that you can kind of feed off of and support. You mentioned that your wife slapped that brochure on the table in front of you. I know from reading about you that you, at least one of your experiences in traveling around the United States, you were with a friend. And I think you actually went down to Mexico in that specific instance on your motorcycles. Recently, I had an experience where my wife, she surprised me for my birthday with a season pass to a ski resort here, and she got me an old hand-me-down snowboard, and we had this plan to go. And then suddenly one day she's like, "Hey, we're going to go today instead of that day." And I had things planned, and I was coming up with all sorts of excuses because I didn't want to go. And she was just blowing down those excuses left and right. And she's like, "You got any more?" Finally we went, and I could only be so grumpy for most of the time. But in the end, I ended up having a really good time. And it was because I had someone around me who was able to help push me in a way that they knew I would appreciate. But at the moment, I couldn't get past my own excuses.
Yeah, it sounds like we're both very lucky in the life partners that we've chosen. And yeah, I mean, I've been with my wife so long now because we got married when we were college kids. I'd have to get out a calculator to figure out how what our next anniversary, how many years it's been. But yeah, you're right. It's really important to, and not just your spouse, but your close friends, the people that you turn to. Are they going to encourage you, or are they going to just help keep you stuck?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had friends that fall on both sides of that issue, and I think people who have addiction problems, whether drinking, drugs, whatever, that the company that you keep can really, keep you stuck in that, as opposed to help you break out of it.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of friends, there was in reading about just your experiences, a few things stood out to me, and there was one or two that I really wanted to ask you about. You mentioned to me in our communications before hopping on the show that you had ridden your motorcycle down to Mexico with your friend, and your friend lost his because it was stolen. You lost yours because it was in a crash, and then you ended up arrested. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that was quite an adventure. So uh, my friend and I have been riding miles and miles and days, and we're hot and dirty. And we come into this beautiful seaside town called Mazatlan, and it's got this beautiful white sand beach. We just sort of jump off our motorcycles and run and dive in the ocean. And we swim around and we lie on the beach for a while, and then we go back to our bikes, and his is gone. I mean, it's just gone. And we think what happened is that he forgot to, because normally we would put our fork locks on and then maybe chain them up. And we think he didn't put his fork lock, and we definitely didn't chain the bikes up. So everything he had, other than the clothes on his back, was gone. And so we met these two older guys from California on the beach, and they said, "Well, we have a campsite outside of town. Why don't you guys, ride out, spend the night out there with us, figure out, what you're going to do next, and just, try to relax, and get through this problem." And so we're out sitting around a campfire, and the one guy says, "I've never been on a motorcycle in my entire life. Would you mind giving me a ride?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." My buddy Tim, he's pretty depressed because he lost everything, so he's kind of a drag tonight. And the other guy said, "Yeah, you guys go ahead." So I said, "Well, okay, well, we'll ride into town and we'll hit a bar or two." And so he hops on the back of my bike, and we're driving through town, and we come to an intersection, and it's very dark because it's a dark night. There's no stop sign. I slow down, look both ways, start to cross the intersection. All of a sudden, it's like there's an explosion, and this car just broadsided us, didn't have its lights on. I didn't see it, and I'm flying through the air. And the guy in the back of my bike was very seriously injured. His leg took the full force of the car hitting it, and his shoulder was driven into the curb. So there's bones in his leg and his shoulder sticking out. My injuries were very minor compared to his. But anyway, so we were in the hospital, and in the meantime, Tim and his friend Gene are at the campsite, and an old drunk Texan guy comes out of an RV with a big old six-shooter and starts firing off shots, one of which uh, just grazes Tim in the forehead. And so in a matter of a few hours, Tim's lost his bike, gotten grazed by a bullet, and I'm in a hospital, and my bike is wrecked. And we discover there's an armed guard on the hospital room, and we can't even leave the room. And I could go on for a long time with this story because it gets even crazier in some ways. But long and short of it is, yeah, I'm under arrest in a hospital room in Mexico, and Tim has got a huge lump on his forehead, and he's trying to figure out, how do we get out of this, because I can't really do much.
I'll be honest, that sounds like a storyline for one of the episodes of the A-Team. I don't know, you know, that's just such a bizarre experience. And you're an author. I haven't checked, and I have to ask, have you written a book about that particular experience?
No.
I bet you could. You could label it fiction or real, and people probably wouldn't believe it either way.
Yeah, I know. In fact, I've only had rare communications with my old friend Tim over the last number of years. But one of the last communications we had was an email from him. He said, "I read your last book. When are you going to write one about our adventure?"
I think it's a good idea. I wanted to move on and talk about the last hard thing that you spoke about. I'm guessing that you found yourself over in Nepal when this avalanche happened, and obviously this stemmed from your first trek over there. So let's take it from you're in Nepal at the moment where you're having that introspective moment, realizing that your life is great, but it's not beautiful. What did you do after that with that realization?
Yeah. Well, one thing I did is I cut back on some of the obligations that I had and just cleared out more space. And, I looked at that as sort of like, weeding my garden to make my garden more attractive, more, uh, just more fruitful. And so that was one thing. But the other thing was mainly just realizing how I chose to be in this marriage. We chose to have our two boys. I chose to develop this law firm, and all of these things are good. And I, chose to be in certain activities and to play certain sports that I was involved in, and those were all good. And so just, weeding out a few things that I didn't really care about, but refocusing on how these good things in my life weren't just obligations. They weren't burdens. They were choices I'd made and were the fruits of my life. And so that, again, just kind of that rebooting of my consciousness, I was able to just kind of reinterpret the meaning of those things from feeling like they were burdens that were causing me stress to how much I appreciated and loved my wife and loved my kids and enjoyed the work I was doing and the my comrades in the law firm and my tennis buddies and so forth.
Well, I can, I can't relate at the scale of which you're talking, but I can certainly relate when thinking about certain days when, nothing really bad happened, but I maybe just had a bad attitude or I wanted more or whatever. And then contrast that with days where I just feel really lucky and really blessed and like I have so much. And, Monday to Tuesday, nothing changed except just up here. So I can easily relate. Once you had that reinterpretation, what was kind of your game plan moving forward? What sort of actions did you take after that?
Yeah, well, and before I address that, I want to give a very concrete example that anybody who's played any sports can relate to this. So back in that time, I had gotten really into competitive tennis. And I was, playing on tournament teams and I was, I'd taken it very seriously and I was on a team with a coach and all this stuff. But it had gotten to the point where I cared so much more about winning than enjoying the experience, the aesthetics of the game, that it was stressful. And after being away from it for several weeks on, going to Nepal, not even seeing a tennis racket, it just occurred to me that, I'd gotten out of appreciating the game for just being fun. And, my mind was so much into, oh, I've got to win, as opposed to, this is a game. It's fun to play. I mean, if when you're doing it well, it's a beautiful experience. And if you blow a shot, big deal. There'll be another one. Try again. And that's just sort of the what I'm advocating in terms of how to look at your whole life that way. And now I've forgotten what where you wanted me to go before
No,
I redirected it.
you're totally fine. I do that all the time. I was just wondering, you get the reinterpretation in your mind, and you're in Nepal. Obviously your trip ended and you came back home. coming back home, what sort of actions did you start doing, and kind of how did you change the trajectory of your life? Obviously, you were in a midlife crisis, so kind of how did you navigate through that?
Yeah. Well, one very concrete thing was my wife and I decided we will have date night, which we had had before, but then we had all these kids activities. I mean, kids can really eat, eat up your life when you're trying to be involved parents. I mean, we had soccer practice and basketball and flag football and taekwondo and scouts and church and just, every single day. It was like there were things to do. So we said, okay, number one, we're going to have a date night every single week, just the two of us, and not even go out with friends, just going to be the two of us. And then the other thing we did is we sat the boys down and we said, okay, you guys are each in, 6 or 7 activities. You are going to limit them to 2. You get to choose whatever 2 you want to be in, but that's it. And so we're thinking, oh, they're going to be really upset. And they're like jumping up and down, cheering and thanking us because they were having the same experience. It was like, we're doing all this stuff and it's all good. I mean, even these little these guys who at that point they're like, 8 and 10 or 10 and 12, somewhere around in that age group. But they understood it too. So so we did that. So we like I said before, we just cleared this space in our life, and as a couple and as a family, we came to appreciate each other more, and we had more time to just be with each other. In terms of my office, the law firm, I don't recall doing anything different other than I announced to the firm, I am going to take 6 to 8 weeks off every year from now on. And I started going to Nepal almost every year. And then I would take a major vacation with my wife, and grandparents would look after the kids. And then we would take a major vacation as a family. And so, because I was the boss, I could do that. And it was really interesting because, my big worry was, oh my God, the office is going to fall apart when I'm gone, and, we won't make as much money, and, how are we going to pay the bills? The first time I went to Nepal, we made more money in that 3 weeks while I was gone than the average 3 weeks when I was there. If you have, good associates, good employees, good employer, whatever, it's going to work. You're just one piece of this machinery, and you can be replaced at least temporarily, or the machine can run without you for some period of time. And so many of us, especially, kind of workaholic American types, we have this idea that, oh, my job, my profession is so important, and it's just, that's who I am. That's my identity. And I think that can be really pathological. I know attorneys who are in their 80s. And in fact, I know one who's in his 90s and who will not quit, won't retire, because his identity is so much wrapped up with, I'm an attorney and that's who I am. And if I lost that, I would be lost. And I think that's pathological. I don't think it's healthy.
That's fascinating to me. Mostly because it's so true. Yet so few of us really structure our lives in a way where we do make room for life to happen. We do make room to take just extra time with our family. So few of us, I don't know if you've probably heard this, but apparently there was a study done. These nurses, they would ask people in hospice who were basically on death's door, some of their biggest regrets, and they always centered around spending more time with family. They wish they would have, rather than, few of them ever said, I wish I spent more time working, you know?
Yeah, I have seen that same information, and I don't doubt it's true. My dad died at the age of 90 2 years ago, and his final days were very interesting. He had throat cancer, and it had spread to his lymph glands, and so he had lymphoma. And the doctors had given him the choice that we can try to treat this aggressively, or just let it take its course, and you'll die. And he chose to just let it take its course and die. And he was 90 years old, and in many ways he'd lived a good life. But so my wife and I were over in Italy when he got the news that the end is coming. But I got an email, and so, but the message was, don't hurry home, just, it'll be fine. So we get home, I call him the night we got home, and he could hardly talk, but he just kept repeating the word love. He just kept saying love, love, and his voice was very croaky. But and then he died 2 days later. And so that was my last conversation with him. But his sort of, the whole focus of his consciousness as he was getting right to the point of death was love. And it was, love for his family. And that's what he wanted to express to me. And it was, it was very sad in a way, but it's also very beautiful. I mean, I treasure hearing his voice. And I didn't really even have to say anything back to him other than, I love you too, Dad. And so that was the whole conversation.
The ancient Romans, I believe, like the soldiers and centurions, had a practice called memento mori, where they would, it basically meant, remember that we're going to die. And they would carry tokens of death to remind them to live. And I think at least the last little bit of our conversation has been one of those tokens where, we are still here. We should make the most of it. We should, like you said, and like your father said, spread love and accept love, and really appreciate the love, and give back what we receive. Before time runs out, I think we better switch gears and talk about the Avalanche story. I've been asking you so many other questions. I feel bad that we haven't even gotten to the Avalanche, but tell me more about what happened exactly, and how you got out of it alive, because being perfectly honest, like, this might sound weird, but Mount Everest is kind of the culmination of one of my biggest fears. So the fact that you survived an avalanche in that area, in the Himalayas, is very impressive to me. So I'd love to know more.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have never tried to climb Mount Everest. I don't ever intend to, and I think 90% of the people who do shouldn't. But that said, I've climbed a number of mountains in that area, which don't require tremendous technical skills. But so my climbing team and our trekking group, which includes a bunch of porters and a cook and a climbing guide and a regular guide, which in Nepal is called a sardar, so chief guide. So, we've got this big crew, and then our team. There were 4 of us on the team, 1 Canadian and 3 Americans, and so we basically got blown off the mountain. It was called Mira Peak, and it's about 21,000 plus feet high. And blizzard conditions, none of the teams that were attempting at that season were able to climb it. And I got altitude sickness up in high camp on the mountain, which was probably around 19,000 feet high. And I had to come down and go back to base camp. And then the others came down a day or so later after, just trying once more and not being able to summit. And so I'm feeling really weak and sick. And the snow has just built up tremendously high. It's hip high. And we're trekking out, trying to get to this Sherpa village called Lukla, which has the airstrip where you fly in and out of the high Himalayas in that part of Nepal. And we get to this one high pass, which is called the Zatrala, and it's about 15,000 feet high. And it's very sheer. You zigzag coming up or going down it. There's lots of boulders, but you have to zigzag because it's just so steep. You can't just go in a straight line down. And so our Sirdar and then the four of us are up there on the top of this high pass, and the rest of our crew, our porters and our cook, our cook is ahead of us, but our porters are behind us. And we look up, and up on this high ridge above us are these three Nepali porters, not from our group, but from another group. And we can see them because they're wearing bright colored parkas. And all of a sudden, we hear a rumbling, and there have been avalanches all around through this period of time because the snow had just built up so high. I mean, really unusually high that spring. And so we hear the rumbling, and first we're thinking, well, maybe there's an avalanche coming, and we start sort of debating, should we spread out or stay close together? And then all of a sudden, Seth, our Nepali Sirdar, just yells, "Run, run!" And so we just start running down, and then we hear this huge rumble, and the avalanche comes. And by the time it got to us, it was just spindrift, meaning basically just dust and snow. And, you couldn't see. It was so thick in the air, you couldn't see anything, but there was no power to it. The real force of it had wiped out by the time it got to the ridge that we were on. And we looked up, and we couldn't see the three Nepali guys, and we learned later they were all killed. And there were a total of 7 people killed that day in avalanches all the way across the Nepal and Tibet Himalaya. A famous climber named Jeff Lowe was killed in those series of avalanches on a mountain called Shishipangma, but same day. And so I was so weak from the altitude sickness. When I'm trying to run down, it's like my body is just barely functioning, but I'm just, kind of galumping along as best as I can and trying not to crash into any boulders. One of our team members, Judy, fell down, and Seth and Tom, our other member, grabbed her and sort of carried her for a few steps before she got her feet under her again. But it was just, we were just trying to outrun it. And luckily, by the time it hit where we were on the Zatrala, it had pretty well petered out. But for our team, the unfortunate piece of this was our porters got stuck on the other side of the avalanche. And one of the most heroic experiences not me, but that I've witnessed in another person, our guide, Seth, told us, okay, you guys, you know how to get to Lukla, so go on without me. I'm going to go back and find our porters on the other side of that avalanche. And Seth climbs back up. So we're about 2,000 feet down. He climbs back up 2,000 feet, locates the porters. One of them is injured. So he has to carry his own pack and the big doko basket full of gear that porter was carrying, help him down. They come all the way down, and then there are there's streams that you have to cross to get to Lukla. And those streams were getting higher and higher, and they couldn't get across the third one, but they're soaking wet because of having crossed the two. And they spent the night soaking wet on the bank of the third river, and then made it into Lukla. So we waited a day and a half for them, not knowing what condition they were in, or even whether they were alive or not. But so we're waiting inside this lodge, and we hear Seth's voice singing, and he's just marching in, carrying this huge doko basket on his back and his pack in front of him, so he looked like a gigantic turtle, singing and helping the one young porter and the other guys strung out behind him. And but that's one of the most tough, courageous experiences of another person who's a friend of mine that I've ever been a part of.
I guess that's why he is, the guy in charge, right?
Well, those mountain guides from Nepal, they're supermen. They are the closest to supermen and women. There are a few women that they're just extraordinary in their strength, their endurance, their determination, and their kindly, sweet disposition.
Wow. I can't imagine. You must be one heck of a runner because you outran an avalanche. Wow. Jeff, I've loved having you on the show. Unfortunately, our time is coming down. I don't want to keep you too long. I do have one quick question before I transition to the end of the show. Just a really quick curiosity. I saw in your bio that you were given the city, or the key to the city of Indianapolis, right?
Yes.
I've seen stuff like that happen on sitcoms and things like that, and I've always wondered, is that an award, or what does that actually do, if I can ask?
Yeah, it's this gigantic key, and there's this hole in the middle of the city. No, it's real. It sounds pretty great, but it's really not that big a deal. I was a summer intern when I was in law school with the city, and our mayor, who was a wonderful guy, a guy named Bill Hudnut, who's died about a year ago. He gave all of his summer interns a key to the city, and all it was is this certificate with a little tie tack of a key with the city emblem on it, but the certificate has this nice fancy language about what a wonderful service you've given to the city. And so it sounds like, oh, you must have done something great for Indianapolis. Actually, not really. I did have a pretty cool job. I visited all of the city parks all across Indianapolis, and there was something like 250 of them.
Wow.
And wrote up reports on the city's potential tort liability in each park. But what was so cool is I got to visit every park, just wander around the city checking out the park. So for a law student, that was a pretty cool job. And then I get to put on my bio, I have the key to the city of Indianapolis.
It's a pretty good trade in my book.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Jeff, based on our conversation today, what 1 to 3 action items would you give our audience to do today or this week to improve their lives?
I would just say weed your garden. As we've talked about, introspectively look at your life, and wherever you're feeling stuck or anxious or stressed, figure out what those points are, and to what extent can you either relieve that stress by eliminating that from your life, or just having a reinterpretation and remembering what its original meaning was, and why you took on that obligation or why you entered into that relationship, and refocus on the meaningfulness of it.
That's a really good action item. I will put that up in the show notes. But Jeff, how can our audience reach out to you, see what you're up to, and support it?
Well, thanks, Justin. I have a website, and it's my full name, which is Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Rasley, Rasley. So www.jeffreyrasley.com, and that has links to my books. It has links to articles about adventures I've had in Nepal, and also if you want to go trekking or mountaineering, how you can connect with me, and I can help you do that.
Excellent. I certainly hope some of our audience definitely reaches out to you and takes you up on that offer. But Jeff, I've enjoyed this conversation. There were a lot of things that we didn't even get to. So I just appreciate your experiences and the insight and the solid piece that you emanate. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope we'll get to do it again, maybe next year in 2021.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Hard Thing podcast. I challenge you to take insights from this podcast and go take action on those insights. It's nothing to listen to a podcast, but it's everything to listen to a podcast and then do something because of what you heard. Now, if you want some extra help in doing that, here's a couple things you could do. Number one, subscribe to the show. This allows you to never miss a single episode. We have episodes, like I said, Mondays and Thursdays, so that way you are constantly having people talk in your head about how to push yourself, how to do more, and how to be better, because we are always sliding backwards. So if you want to prevent that, subscribe to the podcast, make sure you never miss an episode, and share it so you have someone to talk about these things with. Even more, if you want some more accountability, some more support, join The Forge. Now, for those of you who might not know, The Forge is the name of our Thursday show, but it's also the name of a free community we created to help give you a place of support, a place of challenges and pushing yourself. So basically what you can do is you can go join The Forge and you'll get access to a few things. First of all, you'll get access to live streamed episodes of the podcast, meaning when I interview guests, you will be able to watch and interact with me, and I'll be able to interact with the guest on your behalf. I'll answer questions or ask the guest questions that you might put in the chat, as well as you can ask questions to Ty and myself, he's my co-host, on our Thursday show. Next, you'll get special discounts on Hard Thing Podcast merchandise. And if you don't know where that is, go to thehardthingpodcast.com/shop, and you can get all sorts of merchandise to support the show. Last of all, you will get a weekly challenge specific and exclusive to The Forge. So if you want to join The Forge for free, go to theforge.mn.co, join a tribe, join a band where you can get support, you can be pushed, and you can find common cause with people who are trying to do exactly what you're trying to do. Now, if you also want just a little bit more of support in your life, I want to give you a free audiobook. That's right, a free audiobook from Audible. All you got to do is go to audibletrial.com/thehardthingpodcast. You get a free audiobook as well as start a free 30-day trial, meaning you can get other audiobooks at a discount. And Audible has over 180,000 titles of all sorts of genres. Honestly, they have some really good Christmas ones. I'm recording this podcast at the time of Christmas. But they just have a really good selection of audiobooks. One of my favorites is The Complete Works of Sherlock Holmes. I've talked about this many times before, but it is just fantastic and phenomenal literature right there. So go get your free audiobook today from audibletrial.com/thehardthingpodcast. Start listening today. Now, I want to talk about something serious. You want to give back. You want to do more with your life. You want to have more fulfillment. And one of the best ways is to give back, literally. And I would encourage you to give back to the nonprofit organization Operation Underground Railroad. They are, like I said, a nonprofit that goes undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking. Imagine being lost, imagine being scared, and imagine being abused. That's exactly what these kids who are in slavery go through every single day. And OUR, as they're commonly known as, puts a stop to it. So if you want to know more about it, go to OURrescue.org and just get involved. But I would also encourage you to help us as a podcast raise $1,000 for Operation Underground Railroad. So go to gofundme.com/overcoming-average. All the money will go straight to OUR, all of it. So help us raise $1,000 for them. Go to gofundme.com/overcoming-average. Today was a great show, a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with Jeff. And like I said, there was many questions I didn't even get the chance to ask him because I didn't want to take up all of his time. But you'll see us here on next Thursday with our Thursday meditations. Sorry, not Thursday meditations anymore. It's The Forge. You'll see us on Thursday with The Forge. Me and Ty will talk about these action items that Jeff gave us. Until then, my friends, hit us up on social media at The Hard Thing Podcast and keep doing hard things because you will overcome average.